Miles Harper thought sitting down would be simple. Just one chair, one cold stare from a stranger, one chance to prove dignity still mattered in a world built on swipe-left cruelty. He didn't expect the room to turn into a courtroom. He didn't expect his ex-wife's mother to be the defendant. And he sure as hell didn't expect the prosecutor to come back for round two, armed with a smirk and a crowd hungry for blood. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stay seated when everyone else wants you to run. Stick around until the end, hit that like button, and drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this story travels. The coffee shop smelled like burned espresso and second chances. Miles Harper stood in the doorway, shoulder pressed against the frame, scanning the afternoon crowd with the practiced caution of a man who'd learned not to trust peaceful moments. The line snaked toward the counter, college kids hunched over laptops, a couple sharing earbuds, an older man reading a newspaper like it was still 1997. Normal. Quiet. Exactly what Miles needed after 8 hours of installing drywall in a house that smelled like mold and broken promises. He'd come here every Thursday for the past 6 months. Same time, same order. Black coffee, no sugar, and 20 minutes of silence before he had to pick up Sophie from school. It was routine, and routine was sacred when you were a single dad running on fumes and stubbornness. But today, routine shattered the second he saw her. Lillian Brooks sat alone by the window, spine curved like a question mark, hands wrapped around a coffee cup that had stopped steaming long ago. Her silver hair caught the afternoon light, neat and carefully styled, the kind of effort that said she'd prepared for something important. Her floral blouse was pressed, her posture rigid despite the slump, and her eyes were locked on the table like she was trying to memorize the grain of the wood. Miles felt his stomach drop. He knew that look. He'd worn it himself 100 times in the year after the divorce, the look of someone trying to become invisible while the world sharpened its knives. The whispers started before he could take another step. "Isn't that her?" "Oh my God, I think it is." "Poor thing, he just left?" "I heard he took one look and walked out." The voices weren't loud, but they didn't need to be. They slithered across tables and wrapped around Lillian like smoke, and Miles watched her shoulders hitch with every syllable. She didn't look up, she didn't defend herself, she just sat there, absorbing the judgment like she'd earned it. Miles should have walked away. That was the smart move, the safe move. Lillian Brooks was his ex-wife's mother, and Angela had made it crystal clear during the divorce that Miles was no longer family, no longer welcome, no longer anything but a mistake she'd corrected. Angela's parents had followed her lead without question, erasing Miles from holiday dinners and birthday parties like he'd never existed. All except Lillian. Lillian, who still texted him photos of Sophie's artwork from their visits. Lillian, who never missed Sophie's school plays even when Angela didn't show. Lillian, who'd slipped Miles a card last Christmas with a simple note inside. "You're still her father. Don't forget that." Miles exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of every eye that wasn't looking at him yet, but would be the second he moved. Then he walked straight to Lillian's table and sat down. The whispers stopped. Lillian's head snapped up, her face pale except for 2 spots of color high on her cheeks. Shock, embarrassment, maybe both. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Hey," Miles said quietly, setting his keys on the table like he'd planned this all along. "Mind if I join you?" Lillian blinked, her eyes wide and wet. "Miles, you don't have to." "I know," he interrupted gently, "but I'm here anyway." Her throat worked, swallowing something that might have been a sob or a protest. She glanced around the room, catching the stares, the raised eyebrows, the sudden interest from people who'd been minding their own business 5 seconds ago. Her hands tightened around the coffee cup until her knuckles went white. "They're all watching," she whispered. "Let them." Miles leaned back in his chair, deliberately casual, and met the gaze of a woman 2 tables over who looked like she was already drafting a Facebook post. The woman flushed and looked away. Miles turned his attention back to Lillian. "You want to talk about it?" he asked. "No." "Okay." Silence stretched between them, but it wasn't empty. Miles could hear Lillian's breathing, too fast, too shallow, and see the way her fingers kept adjusting the cup, rotating it in tiny increments like she needed something to control. I'm so stupid, she finally said, the words barely audible. You're not. I am. Her voice cracked. I'm a pathetic, desperate old woman who… Stop. The word came out harder than Miles intended, and Lillian flinched. He softened his tone immediately. You're not pathetic. You're not desperate. And you're sure as hell not old enough to write yourself off like that. Lillian's laugh was bitter, hollow. You didn't see his face, Miles. You didn't hear what he said. So tell me. She shook her head, tears pooling but not falling. It doesn't matter. It does. Why? Lillian looked at him then, really looked at him, and Miles saw something raw and broken in her expression. Why do you even care? After everything, Angela, after what we… Because you're Sophie's grandmother, Miles said simply. And because you're the only one who didn't treat me like garbage when my marriage fell apart. Lillian's breath hitched. She looked down at her coffee, at her trembling hands, at the table that had become her entire world for the past hour. I met him online, she whispered. Miles waited. One of those dating apps. I know. It's ridiculous for someone my age. But everyone said I should try, that I needed to get out there, that life doesn't end at 60. Her voice turned sharp, self-mocking. Turns out they were wrong. What happened? Lillian's jaw clenched. We messaged for 2 weeks. He seemed nice. Normal. Said he was a retired accountant, loved hiking, wanted to meet for coffee. So I said yes. I got dressed up. I came here early because I didn't want to be late. I was actually excited, Miles. Can you imagine? 62 years old and excited like a teenager. She paused, staring at nothing. And then he walked in. Miles felt his chest tighten. He looked at me. Lillian continued, her voice flat now, drained. Looked at me like I was something he'd stepped in. Walked right up to the table, stood there for maybe 10 seconds, and then said, You look a lot older than your photos. Just like that. No hello, no apology, just judgment. Jesus, Miles muttered. I tried to explain that my photos were recent, that I didn't lie about my age, But he wasn't listening. He just shook his head, said he wasn't interested in wasting his time, and walked out. Lillian's voice broke. In front of everyone. The tears finally fell, quiet and unstoppable. Miles didn't reach for her, didn't offer empty comfort. He just sat there, present and steady, while Lillian cried into her cold coffee and the room pretended not to notice. I should have known better, she whispered. I should have stayed home. I'm too old for this. Too invisible. No. Lillian looked up, startled. You're not invisible, Miles said firmly. You're sitting right here. I see you. Sophie sees you. And that jackass who walked out, he's the one who's blind. Miles, I mean it. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. You know what Sophie told me last week? She said you're the only grown-up who actually listens to her. Not just pretends, actually listens. She said you remember things. Her favorite color. The names of her stuffed animals. The fact that she hates green beans but loves peas. Miles's voice softened. That's not invisible, Lillian. That's love. And love's never pathetic. Lillian pressed a hand to her mouth, her shoulders shaking. She asks about you, you know, Miles continued. Every time I pick her up from Angela's, she asks if you're coming to visit soon. She lights up when I say yes. You're her favorite person. Don't, Lillian whispered. Don't what? Don't be kind to me. I can't handle it right now. Miles understood that. He'd been there himself in the early days after Angela left, when kindness felt like salt in a wound, because it reminded you what you'd lost. So he changed the subject. Sophie's got a field trip next week, he said casually. Science museum. She's been talking about it nonstop. Something about dinosaurs and a planetarium show. Lillian wiped her eyes, grateful for the shift. She loves dinosaurs. She does. Last night she informed me that a brontosaurus isn't actually a real dinosaur. It's an apatosaurus. I nodded like I knew that already. A ghost of a smile touched Lillian's lips. She's smart. Too smart. She's going to figure out I'm faking most of my homework help any day now. The smile grew a fraction. You're doing fine. I'm surviving. There's a difference. Lillian looked at him then, really looked, and Miles saw recognition in her eyes, the kind that comes from shared experience. She knew what it was like to be left behind, to rebuild yourself from scraps and hope nobody noticed how badly you were shaking. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for sitting down." "You don't have to thank me." "Yes, I do. You didn't have to do this. Most people wouldn't." "Most people are cowards." Lillian laughed, small and watery, but real. "Is that what you tell yourself when you do something reckless?" "Every time." The moment hung there, fragile and almost comfortable, until the door chimed and Miles saw Lillian's face go white. He turned. The man walking through the door was mid-60s, dressed in an expensive polo shirt and khakis that screamed country club retirement. His hair was silver, his tan salon perfect, and his expression was pure satisfaction as he scanned the room and locked eyes with Lillian. "Oh no," Lillian breathed. "Oh God, no." "That him?" Miles asked, his voice flat. Lillian didn't answer. She'd gone completely still, prey recognizing a predator. The man walked toward them, slow and deliberate, holding up his phone like a trophy. "Forgot this," he announced loudly, addressing Lillian but playing to the crowd. "Wouldn't want to lose it. Paid a lot of money for this phone, unlike some people who apparently can't afford a decent photo filter." Nervous laughter rippled through the café. Lillian's face went scarlet. "Please. I get it," the man continued, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "Everyone wants to look their best online. But there's a difference between flattering angles and false advertising, you know?" Miles felt something cold and sharp settle in his chest. "You should go," he said quietly. The man's gaze flicked to Miles, dismissive. "Excuse me? You got your phone, now leave." "I'm sorry, who are you? Her son?" The insult landed exactly as intended. Lillian made a small sound, wounded. Miles stood up. He wasn't tall, 5'10" on a good day, and he wasn't built like someone who spent hours in a gym. But he'd spent 20 years in construction, and his body carried the kind of lean, wiry strength that came from hard work and harder lessons. More importantly, he carried himself like someone who'd learned when to walk away and when to stand his ground. This wasn't a walking away moment. "I'm someone who thinks you've said enough," Miles replied, his tone calm but final. The man's smile widened. "Oh, I see. You're her, what? Her backup plan? Guy she texted when I didn't work out?" He looked Miles up and down, taking in the work boots, the paint-stained jeans, the faded flannel shirt. "Good luck with that, buddy. You're gonna need it." The cafe had gone silent. Every eye was locked on their table. Lillian stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I'm leaving." "No," Miles said. She stared at him. "What?" "Don't run." Miles kept his eyes on the man. "He doesn't get to do this." "Do what?" the man asked, his voice mocking now. "Tell the truth?" "Look, I'm sorry if reality hurts, but she lied about her age, her looks, everything. I'm the victim here." "You're not a victim," Miles said evenly. "You're a bully, and you came back here for one reason, to humiliate someone in front of an audience because it makes you feel important." The man's smile faltered. "That's ridiculous." "Is it? Because you already got your phone. You could have walked out, but instead you came back to twist the knife a little deeper. That's not confidence. That's cruelty." "I don't have to listen to this." "Then leave." "You don't get to tell me what to do." Miles stepped forward, closing the distance between them. He didn't raise his voice, didn't make a threat. He just spoke with the kind of quiet certainty that came from years of being underestimated and learning how to stand anyway. "You're right," Miles said. "I can't make you do anything, but I can make sure everyone in this room knows exactly what you are. You're a man who gets off on making women feel small. You came here to meet someone, decided she wasn't good enough based on 5 seconds of judgment, and then came back to parade your cruelty like it's something to be proud of. That's who you are. And everyone here sees it now." The man's face flushed red. "You don't know anything about me." "I know enough. She catfished me. She used recent photos and told you her real age. You're just mad she doesn't look like a fantasy." The man opened his mouth, closed it, looked around the room for support that wasn't coming. The crowd that had been so eager to watch Lillian's humiliation was now watching him, and the mood had shifted. A few people had pulled out their phones, not to mock Lillian, but to film him. His smugness cracked. "This is insane," he muttered, backing toward the door. "You're both insane." "Maybe," Miles agreed. "But at least we're not cruel." The man turned and walked out, moving fast now, his phone clutched like a shield. The door chimed behind him. Silence held for 3 seconds. Then someone clapped. One person at first, then another, then scattered applause that Lillian clearly didn't know how to process. She stood frozen, her face streaked with tears, her hands shaking. Miles gently touched her elbow. "Come on, let's get out of here." She nodded mutely, and Miles guided her toward the door, ignoring the stares, the whispered approval, the barista who gave him a thumbs up. He just focused on getting Lillian outside, into fresh air, away from the performance neither of them had asked for. The sidewalk was bright and cold, the autumn sun slanting low. Lillian stopped walking after half a block and leaned against a brick wall, pressing her palms to her face. "I can't believe you did that," she whispered. "Someone had to." "But now they're going to talk. They'll say Let them." Lillian lowered her hands, looking at him with something between gratitude and terror. "You don't understand. Angela will hear about this. She'll make assumptions. I don't care what Angela thinks. But Sophie loves you. That's all that matters." Lillian's breath came in short gasps, panic setting in now that the adrenaline was fading. "I humiliated myself in there." "No," Miles said firmly. "He tried to humiliate you. There's a difference. Everyone saw you survive. That's not the same as losing." Lillian searched his face, looking for pity or judgment, and finding neither. Her shoulders finally dropped, exhaustion replacing panic. "Why did you stay?" she asked quietly. Miles considered lying, offering some easy answer about kindness or doing the right thing, but Lillian deserved better than that. "Because when Angela left me, your entire family disappeared overnight," he said. "Angela's dad stopped taking my calls. Her sister unfriended me on every platform. Her brother told me I was dead to them. Everyone chose sides, and I lost." He paused. "Except you." Lillian's eyes filled again. "You kept showing up for Sophie," Miles continued. "You kept treating me like I was still her father, like I still mattered. You never made me beg for scraps of my own daughter's life." His voice roughened. "So yeah, when I saw you sitting there alone, taking hits from some asshole in a room full of strangers, I stayed. Because you stayed for me when you didn't have to." "Miles, I'm not done." He stepped closer, making sure she heard every word. "After the divorce, I spent a year feeling invisible, like I'd been erased from my own life. People looked through me, talked around me, treated me like I was a mistake that needed correcting." Miles's jaw tightened. "I know what that does to you, how it makes you feel worthless, disposable, like you don't deserve to take up space." Lillian's face crumpled. "But you're not invisible, Lillian. You're one of the most present people I know. You show up, you remember, you care, and anyone who can't see that is blind, broken, or both." She was crying openly now, but Miles didn't stop. "So don't let one cruel man rewrite who you are. Don't let a room full of strangers define your worth. And don't you dare call yourself pathetic again." Lillian covered her face with her hands, her whole body shaking with sobs that had been building for longer than one humiliating afternoon. Miles waited, standing guard, until she finally caught her breath. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything. I thought—" She swallowed hard. "I thought I was done. Invisible. Past the point of mattering to anyone. You matter to Sophie. Sophie's 8. And she sees you clearer than any adult in that cafe." Miles pulled out his phone, scrolled for a second, then turned the screen toward Lillian. It was a photo from last month, Sophie grinning at the camera, holding a painting of a sunset she'd made at Lillian's house. The colors were wild and beautiful, and Sophie's pride was written all over her face. "She asked me to frame this," Miles said quietly. "She wanted it in her room so she could see it every day. She said it reminds her of you." Lillian stared at the photo, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "That's who you are," Miles said. Not what some stranger decided in 10 seconds. Not what a room full of gossips whispered. You're the person who helps an 8-year-old girl believe she can paint sunsets. Lillian's shoulders shook again, but this time when she looked at Miles, there was something fragile and new in her eyes. Something that looked almost like hope. They stood there on the sidewalk, two people the world had tried to discard, holding on to proof that they still mattered. A flower stand sat on the corner half a block down, bright bouquets catching the afternoon light. Miles glanced at it, then at Lillian. "Come on," he said gently. "Where?" "You'll see." He walked toward the stand, and after a moment's hesitation, Lillian followed. The flower vendor was a young woman with paint-stained hands and a nose ring, arranging stems with the focused precision of someone who understood that beauty required attention. She looked up as Miles and Lillian approached, her expression neutral until she caught sight of Lillian's tear-streaked face. Then something softened in her eyes. "Can I help you?" she asked gently. Miles scanned the buckets of flowers, roses in every shade, cheerful daisies, elegant lilies, vibrant sunflowers that seemed too optimistic for the moment. His gaze settled on a cluster of white roses, simple and clean, their petals just beginning to open. "One of those," he said, pointing. The vendor selected a stem carefully, trimming the end with quick, practiced movements before wrapping it in brown paper tied with twine. She handed it to Miles, but he passed it directly to Lillian. Lillian stared at the rose like she didn't know what to do with it. "Miles, you don't have to—" "I know. This is too much. It's a flower." "It's not just a flower," Lillian's voice cracked. You're trying to fix something that can't be fixed." Miles pulled out his wallet, handing the vendor a 10 and waving off the change. "I'm not trying to fix anything. I'm just giving you something that matches who you are." "A flower?" "Something beautiful that people notice when they're actually paying attention." The vendor smiled, ducking her head as she tucked the money into her apron. Lillian held the rose carefully, like it might break, her fingers trembling against the paper. "I don't deserve this," she whispered. "Yes, you do. You don't understand what happened in there. That's just who I am now. Pathetic and desperate and—" "Stop!" Miles's voice was firm but not harsh. "That man doesn't get to define you. One bad date doesn't erase 62 years of being a good person. But everyone saw you survive. That's different than failing." Lillian looked down at the rose, her throat working. "I feel like such a fool." "You're not a fool for wanting connection. You're human." "Human," Lillian repeated, tasting the word like she'd forgotten what it meant. "I used to feel human. Before Richard died. Before Angela moved to Seattle. Before I started eating dinner alone every night and realized nobody actually needs me anymore." Miles felt that sentence land in his chest like a stone. He knew that loneliness, the kind that crept in when the noise of family faded and left you sitting in silence, wondering if anyone would notice if you just stopped showing up. "Sophie needs you," he said. "Sophie has you, and Angela." "Angela's in Seattle building a new life. I'm doing my best, but I'm one person, Lillian, and Sophie needs more than just me trying not to screw up bedtime and homework." Lillian's eyes filled again. "She's such a sweet girl." "She is, and she got that from somewhere." Miles paused. "You know what she told me last week? She said when she grows up, she wants to be like you." Lillian's head snapped up. "What?" "She said you're the kindest person she knows, that you never get mad even when she spills things or asks too many questions. She said you make her feel important." "Miles, don't—" "I'm not making this up. Those were her exact words. Grandma makes me feel important." He held Lillian's gaze. "That's not nothing. That's everything." Lillian pressed the rose to her chest, her face crumpling. "Then why do I feel so worthless?" "Because one asshole convinced you that his opinion matters more than a little girl's love, and that's a lie." They stood there on the corner, foot traffic flowing around them, business people rushing to meetings, teenagers laughing at something on a phone, an elderly couple walking arm in arm with the ease of decades. Normal life, continuing like the world hadn't just tried to crush someone under the weight of casual cruelty. "I don't know how to come back from this," Lillian said finally. "Everyone in that cafe knows. By tomorrow, everyone in town will know. They'll say I'm desperate, pathetic, A lonely old woman who got exactly what she deserved. Let them say it. Easy for you to say. Is it? Miles's voice hardened slightly. When Angela left, the rumors started before I'd even moved out. People said I must have cheated, that I was abusive, that I drove her away. I heard it all, at Sophie's school, at the hardware store, at the bank. Everywhere I went, people had already decided who I was based on gossip and assumptions. Lillian winced. I didn't know it was that bad. Most people didn't ask. They just believed whatever story made the most sense to them. Miles shoved his hands in his pockets. But you know what I learned? Other people's narratives don't have to be your truth. They can say whatever they want. Doesn't make it real. But how do you live with it? The whispers? The judgment? You focus on what actually matters. Sophie, work, the people who stuck around. Miles met her eyes. You. Lillian's breath caught. Miles, I mean it. When everyone else wrote me off, you didn't. You kept showing up, kept treating me like a person. That mattered more than you know. I couldn't stand the thought of Sophie losing you. She loves you so much. And she loves you, so don't let today steal that from her. A bus rumbled past, belching exhaust. Somewhere down the street, a car alarm blared and then stopped. The city moved forward, indifferent to individual pain, and Miles watched Lillian absorb that reality, the knowledge that the world wouldn't stop for her humiliation, but also wouldn't define her by it unless she let it. I deleted the app, Lillian said abruptly. What? The dating app, in the cafe while you were talking to him. I deleted it. She laughed, sharp and bitter. Guess I won't be finding love after all. One bad experience doesn't mean you should give up. It wasn't just bad, Miles. It was humiliating, public. Proof that I'm exactly what I feared, too old, too invisible, too late. That's not what happened. Then what did happen? Miles chose his words carefully. You took a risk. You put yourself out there. And you ran into someone cruel who used your vulnerability as a weapon. That says everything about him and nothing about you. It says I'm a fool for trying. It says you're brave. Lillian shook her head. Brave people don't cry in coffee shops. Yes, they do. Brave people cry and then stand back up. Cowards hide and blame everyone else. Miles gestured toward the cafe they'd left behind. That guy? He's a coward. He couldn't handle the fact that a real woman showed up instead of a fantasy, so he punished you for existing. That's weakness, not strength. He seemed pretty strong when he was mocking me in front of everyone. Bullies always do, but strength isn't about making other people feel small. It's about lifting people up, even when it costs you something. Miles paused. Like you did for me. Lillian looked at him, really looked, and Miles saw the moment she understood what he was saying, that her kindness after his divorce hadn't just been nice, it had been necessary. Life-saving, even. I didn't do anything special, she said softly. You did. You saw me when I felt invisible. You treated me with dignity when everyone else acted like I didn't deserve it. You made sure Sophie knew I was still her dad. Miles's voice roughened. You have no idea how much that meant. I just couldn't stand watching Angela erase you. It wasn't right. Most people don't care about right when it's inconvenient. You did. Lillian's fingers tightened on the rose. I wish I felt as good as you're making me sound. You will. Just takes time. How much time did it take you to stop feeling like garbage after the divorce? Miles considered lying, offering some hopeful timeline that suggested healing was quick and linear. But Lillian deserved honesty. I'm still working on it, he admitted. Some days are better than others, but it gets easier when you stop measuring your worth by other people's opinions. And how do you do that? You find proof that contradicts their story. For me, that's Sophie. Every time she hugs me or tells me about her day or asks me to read her another chapter before bed, I remember that I matter, not because I'm perfect, but because I show up. Lillian's eyes glistened. She really does love you. And she loves you, so maybe start there. When the voices in your head tell you you're worthless, remember that an 8-year-old girl thinks you hung the moon. That's not nothing. It feels like not enough. Then add to it. Find more proof. Keep showing up for Sophie. Volunteer somewhere. Take a class. Do something that reminds you you're more than what happened today. Lillian was quiet for a long moment, turning the rose slowly in her hands. You make it sound simple. It's not simple. It's just necessary. A notification chimed on Miles's phone. He pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and felt his stomach drop. 3:15. He was supposed to pick up Sophie at 3:30, and the school was a 20-minute drive in good traffic. I have to go, he said reluctantly. Sophie gets out soon. Panic flashed across Lillian's face. Of course, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to keep you. You didn't keep me. I chose to stay. Miles hesitated, then pulled out his phone again. Give me your number. What? Your phone number. I want to check in. Make sure you're okay. Lillian stared at him like he'd suggested something impossible. Miles, you don't have to. I know. Give me your number anyway. She recited it slowly, like she expected him to realize his mistake halfway through. Miles typed it into his contacts, labeled it simply Lillian, and sent her a quick text so she'd have his number too. There, he said. Now you can't disappear on me. I wasn't planning to disappear. Good, because Sophie would never forgive me if I let you. Lillian's smile was small and fragile, but real. Tell her I said hello. I will. Miles started to turn, then stopped. And Lillian? Yes? You're not too old. You're not invisible. And you're sure as hell not pathetic. You're just someone who had a really bad afternoon. Don't let it become your whole story. Lillian nodded, not trusting her voice. Miles walked to his truck, parked 3 blocks away in a meter spot he'd probably overpaid for. He climbed in, started the engine, and sat there for a moment watching Lillian in the rearview mirror. She was still standing on the corner, holding the white rose like a lifeline, looking small and lost and impossibly brave. He pulled into traffic, navigating toward Sophie's school with the kind of autopilot efficiency that came from doing the same route 5 days a week. His mind kept replaying the scene in the café. Lillian's face when that man walked in, the cruelty in his voice, the way the room had fed off her humiliation like entertainment. Miles's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He'd spent the past 2 years learning to swallow his anger, to keep his head down and focus on being the stable parent Sophie needed. But today had cracked something open, reminded him that sometimes silence wasn't strength, it was cowardice, and he was done being quiet when people he cared about were being hurt. The school parking lot was already filling with SUVs and minivans, parents scrolling through phones or chatting in clusters while they waited for the final bell. Miles found a spot near the back and killed the engine, checking his phone out of habit. Lillian had texted back. Thank you. Just 2 words, but they carried weight. Miles typed a response. Anytime. Mean it. He shoved the phone in his pocket and leaned back against the headrest, exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical work. Emotional labor was its own kind of heavy, and today had demanded more than he'd expected to give. The bell rang. Seconds later, the double doors burst open and kids poured out like water from a broken dam, backpacks bouncing, voices shrieking, energy that seemed impossible after 6 hours of forced sitting. Miles spotted Sophie immediately, her dark braids flying as she ran toward the truck with her usual enthusiasm. She yanked open the door and climbed in, dumping her backpack on the floor with a theatrical sigh. Hi, Dad. Hey, kiddo. Good day? It was okay. We had a substitute in math, and she let us play games the whole time. Sophie buckled her seatbelt, then looked at him with the sudden focus kids got when they sensed something was off. Are you okay? Miles started the truck. Yeah, why? You look sad. Just tired. That's what you always say when you're sad. Miles glanced at her, caught off guard by how well his 8-year-old could read him. I'm fine, Soph, promise. She didn't look convinced, but let it drop, launching instead into a detailed recap of the substitute teacher's questionable classroom management and how Tommy Richards got sent to the principal's office for throwing erasers. Miles listened with half his attention, the other half still stuck on Lillian standing alone with a white rose, trying to believe she wasn't invisible. Dad? You're not listening. I am. What did I just say? Miles hesitated. Something about Tommy? Sophie rolled her eyes. I asked if we could get ice cream. Oh. Miles checked the clock on the dashboard. 4 o'clock. He still needed to make dinner, help with homework, maybe throw in a load of laundry if he wanted Sophie to have clean clothes for tomorrow. Ice cream was an unnecessary detour. Sure, he heard himself say. Sophie's face lit up. Really? Really, but just one scoop. 2? 1.5. Final offer. Deal. 20 minutes later, they sat at a picnic table outside a soft-serve place that had been there since Miles was a kid. Sophie attacked her chocolate vanilla twist with the kind of focused intensity she usually reserved for art projects, while Miles picked at his own cone without much enthusiasm. Dad? Yeah? Why did you really say yes to ice cream? You always say we have to eat real food first. Miles smiled despite himself. Can't I just be nice? You're always nice, but you're not always ice cream before dinner nice. Something happened. Sharp kid. Too sharp sometimes. I ran into someone today, Miles said carefully. Someone who was having a bad day. Helped them out a little. Sophie's eyes widened. Like a stranger. Not a stranger. Someone we know. Who? Miles hesitated, then decided honesty was better than evasion. Grandma Lillian, Sophie gasped, ice cream forgotten. Grandma Lillian, is she okay? What happened? Can we go see her? The rapid-fire questions made Miles's chest ache. This was what Lillian needed to hear, not some stranger's cruel judgment, but the unfiltered love of a child who didn't know how to fake caring. She's okay, Miles assured her. Just had a rough afternoon. I helped her feel better. How? Talked to her, made sure she knew people care about her. Sophie considered this with the seriousness of a Supreme Court justice. Did you tell her I love her? I did. Good. She needs to know that. Why do you think that? Sophie shrugged, licking chocolate from her thumb. Because sometimes grown-ups forget that people love them. They get all worried about other stuff and forget the important things. Miles stared at his daughter, wondering when she'd gotten so wise. You're right, he said quietly. Sometimes grown-ups do forget. So we have to remind them. That's what Grandma Lillian does for me. Whenever I'm sad, she reminds me that I'm special and smart and good at drawing. So we should remind her too. We should. Can I call her? Miles pulled out his phone, found Lillian's number, and hit the call button before he could second-guess the impulse. It rang 3 times before she answered, her voice tentative. Miles? Hey, I have someone who wants to talk to you. He handed the phone to Sophie, who took it with both hands like it was something precious. Grandma Lillian, it's me, Sophie. Miles couldn't hear Lillian's response, but he saw Sophie's smile grow. I'm good. Dad got me ice cream before dinner, which is basically the best day ever. But he said you had a bad day, so I wanted to make sure you're okay. A pause. You don't sound okay. You sound like when I cry and try to pretend I'm not crying. Miles bit back a smile. Brutal honesty, Sophie's specialty. Well, I wanted to tell you that I love you very much and you're my favorite grandma and I can't wait to see you again. Dad says you forget sometimes that people love you, so I'm reminding you. Okay? Another pause, longer this time. Okay, good. Oh, and Dad bought you flowers. He told me in the truck. That means he thinks you're special because he only buys flowers for special people. Miles felt heat creep up his neck. He hadn't exactly told Sophie that, but apparently she'd inferred it anyway. Uh-huh. A white rose. He said it was beautiful, just like you. Miles rubbed his face, equal parts embarrassed and touched that Sophie had absorbed more of his conversation with Lillian than he'd realized. Okay, Grandma, I have to finish my ice cream before it melts. But remember, I love you, and you're special, and Dad thinks you're beautiful. Bye. She handed the phone back to Miles, beaming with the satisfaction of a mission accomplished. Miles took the phone cautiously. Lillian? Hi. Her voice was thick, shaky. Is she always like that? Pretty much. Lillian's voice broke. She's the most wonderful child. I know, and she meant every word. Miles, I don't know what to say. She made me feel like you matter? Yes. Good. Because you do. Silence stretched between them, comfortable now instead of awkward. Thank you, Lillian finally said, for today. For all of it. For not walking away when you could have. I told you I wasn't walking away. I know, and I'm starting to believe you meant it. Miles glanced at Sophie, who was down to the cone now, crunching happily. She wants to see you soon, maybe this weekend? I'd like that. Saturday afternoon? I could bring her by your place. We'll stay for dinner if you're up for it. I'd love that. Lillian paused. Miles? Yeah? You really think I'm beautiful? Miles felt his face heat again. I think you're a good person who deserves to be treated with respect. And yeah, I think anyone who can see past surface-level bullshit would agree you're beautiful. Lillian's laugh was watery but genuine. You're a terrible liar. I'm not lying. Sophie made that part up. She exaggerated. Doesn't mean it's not true. Another pause, and Miles could practically hear Lillian processing that, trying to decide if she could believe him. I should let you go, she said finally. Thank you for having Sophie call. It meant everything. She wanted to. I'll text you about Saturday. Okay? And Miles? Yeah? You're a good man. I hope you know that. Miles didn't trust his voice, so he just said, see you Saturday, and ended the call. Sophie was watching him with ice cream on her nose and wisdom in her eyes. You like Grandma Lillian, she announced. Of course I like her. She's your grandmother. No, I mean, you like her. Sophie, it's okay, Dad. I think it's nice. She's lonely and you're both really nice, so maybe you could be lonely together, and then you wouldn't be lonely anymore. Miles stared at his daughter, wondering how an 8-year-old had just summarized adult relationships with more clarity than most therapists. It's not that simple, kiddo. Why not? Because Miles fumbled for an explanation that made sense. Because Grandma Lillian is your mom's mom. That makes things complicated. Mom doesn't care about Grandma Lillian anymore. She never calls her. The observation landed hard. Miles knew it was true. Angela had essentially cut her own mother out of her new life in Seattle, too busy building her career and new relationship to maintain family ties. But hearing Sophie say it out loud made it worse somehow. Your mom cares, Miles said, though he wasn't sure he believed it. She's just busy. Too busy for Grandma? That's mean. It's complicated. You always say that when you don't want to explain things. Because it's true. Sophie finished her cone, wiped her hands on a napkin with exaggerated care, and looked at Miles with the kind of earnest intensity that made him feel like he was being interviewed. Dad, can I ask you something? Always. Do you still love Mom? The question hit like a punch. Miles took a slow breath, choosing his words with the care of someone defusing a bomb. I love that your mom gave me you, he said carefully, and I'll always be grateful for that. But the kind of love that makes people want to be married? No, kiddo, that's gone. Do you think you'll ever love someone else? Maybe. Someday. Like Grandma Lillian? Sophie, I'm just saying she's really nice and she makes good cookies and she always listens and she needs someone to be nice to her because that mean man wasn't nice and you're the nicest person I know, so it makes sense. Miles couldn't help but smile. You've got it all figured out, huh? Mostly. Sophie slid off the picnic bench. Can we go home now? I have homework. The sudden shift gave Miles whiplash, but he'd learned not to question 8-year-old logic. Yeah, let's go. They drove home in comfortable silence, Sophie humming something tuneless while Miles's mind wandered back to Lillian. Not in the romantic way Sophie had suggested, that was ridiculous, complicated, and about 17 different kinds of inappropriate, but in the simpler way of recognizing someone who understood what it felt like to be discarded and was trying desperately to remember their own worth. He could help with that, should help with that, not because he was trying to be a hero or because he wanted anything in return, but because Lillian had done the same for him when he needed it most. And maybe that's all kindness ever was, paying forward the grace you'd been given when you were drowning. His phone buzzed as he pulled into their driveway. A text from Lillian. Thank you for today. For everything. You reminded me I'm not invisible. Miles stared at the message, feeling something warm and complicated settle in his chest. He typed back, You were never invisible. Some people just weren't looking. Saturday arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made everything feel possible. Miles woke to sunlight streaming through inadequate curtains and Sophie, already awake, sitting cross-legged on her bed, with markers scattered around her like ammunition. "What are you doing?" he asked from the doorway, voice still rough with sleep. "Making a card for Grandma Lillian." Sophie didn't look up, her tongue poking out slightly as she concentrated on drawing what appeared to be a very enthusiastic flower. "I want her to know we're excited to see her." Miles checked his phone. 7:30. Their visit wasn't until 2 in the afternoon. "You've got 6.5 hours, kiddo. Pretty sure you'll finish in time." "I want it to be perfect." "It will be. Everything you make is perfect." Sophie finally looked up, fixing him with a skeptical stare that belonged on someone much older. "You have to say that. You're my dad." "Doesn't make it less true." She went back to her drawing, and Miles headed to the kitchen to start coffee. The apartment was small, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen-living room combo that required strategic furniture placement to not feel claustrophobic. It wasn't much, but it was theirs, and Miles had learned to find peace in that distinction. His phone buzzed as the coffee maker gurgled to life. A text from Lillian. "Still okay for today? I don't want to impose if you have other plans." Miles smiled despite himself. 3 days of occasional texts had established a pattern. Lillian apologizing for existing, Miles refusing to let her. He typed back, "Sophie's already making you a card. If we cancel now, I'll never hear the end of it." The response came quickly. "Tell her she doesn't have to do that. Too late. She's already drawn what I think is a flower. Might be a dinosaur. Hard to tell. I can't wait to see it. See you at 2. And Lillian, stop apologizing for taking up space." A long pause, then, "I'm trying." Miles poured his coffee and settled at the kitchen table with his laptop, intending to pay bills before Sophie demanded breakfast. But his mind kept drifting to Thursday afternoon, to Lillian's face when that man had come back for round 2, to the way the crowd had fed off her humiliation, to the moment she'd held that white rose like it was proof she still mattered. He'd replayed the scene a dozen times, each iteration sharpening his anger at how casually people could be cruel. The man in the café hadn't just rejected Lillian, he'd made a spectacle of it, turned her vulnerability into entertainment because it made him feel powerful. And the crowd had let him, eager for drama that didn't cost them anything. Miles had seen that dynamic before, in the months after Angela left. People loved a scandal, loved picking apart the wreckage of someone else's life because it confirmed their own choices were correct. He'd been the subject of that scrutiny, felt the weight of assumptions and whispers and casual judgments delivered by people who'd never bothered to ask his side. But at least he'd had Sophie, had work, had the basic framework of a life that forced him to keep moving even when he wanted to collapse. Lillian had lost her husband 2 years ago. Angela had moved across the country and barely called. Her son lived in Phoenix and visited maybe twice a year. She'd spent the past 24 months watching her life contract into something small and quiet, and then she'd done the brave thing, put herself out there, tried to find connection, and been punished for it. That kind of cruelty left marks. Miles knew because he carried his own. The difference was, he'd had someone who refused to let him disappear. Now it was his turn to be that person for someone else. "Dad?" Sophie appeared in the doorway, card in hand. "Can I show you?" Miles set down his coffee. "Let's see it." She handed it over with the nervous pride of someone presenting important work. The front showed a stick figure with silver hair holding hands with a smaller stick figure with dark braids. Above them, a crooked rainbow arced across a sky full of stars that looked more like asterisks. Inside, in Sophie's careful printing, "You are special and I love you. Love, Sophie." "It's perfect," Miles said, and meant it. "You really think so?" "I know so. She's gonna love it." Sophie beamed. "Can we bring her something else too? Like cookies or flowers or something?" "We're bringing dinner. I'm making lasagna." "You can't bring lasagna that's still cooking. We need something she can have right away." Miles considered this 8-year-old logic and found it sound. "What do you suggest?" "Flowers. You gave her one before. We should give her more." "Flowers it is. We'll stop on the way." Sophie nodded, satisfied, and wandered back to her room to find an envelope worthy of her masterpiece. Miles returned to his laptop, but the bills could wait. Instead, he found himself Googling how to help someone with loneliness, and then immediately feeling foolish. But the articles that came up weren't foolish. They talked about consistent contact, active listening, helping people build new connections, encouraging activities that fostered purpose. Basic things, really. Show up. Pay attention. Treat people like they matter. Miles could do that. He spent the rest of the morning cleaning the apartment with Sophie's questionable help, cooking lasagna that would need to be transported carefully, and fielding approximately 40 questions about whether Grandma Lillian would like the card, the flowers they hadn't bought yet, the bracelet Sophie had made from rubber bands, and whether it was weird to bring your own food to someone's house. It's not weird, Miles assured her for the third time. She invited us for dinner. I'm making dinner. That's how it works. But what if she already made dinner? Then we'll have lots of food. What if she doesn't like lasagna? Everyone likes lasagna. I don't like the cheese part where it gets all brown and crusty. That's the best part. It's weird. You're weird. Sophie giggled, the sound bright and uncomplicated, and Miles felt the knot in his chest loosen slightly. Whatever else was complicated in his life, this part was simple. Sophie was happy, healthy, loved. That was enough. At 1:30, they loaded the lasagna into the truck along with Sophie's card, the rubber band bracelet, and a bouquet of mixed flowers Miles had picked up from the grocery store. Nothing fancy, just cheerful daisies and purple asters that seemed appropriate for an autumn afternoon. Lillian lived in a quiet neighborhood about 20 minutes away, in a 2-story house that had probably been built in the 70s and maintained with the kind of careful attention that spoke of pride and loneliness. The lawn was pristine, the flower beds mulched and tidy, the shutters freshly painted. A house that was loved by someone who had too much time to love it. Miles parked in the driveway, and Sophie was out of the truck before he'd even turned off the engine, bouncing on her toes with anticipation. Remember, Miles said, grabbing the lasagna, inside voice, and don't ask her about Thursday unless she brings it up first. I know, Dad. I'm not a baby. Never said you were. They made it to the front door, and before Miles could knock, it swung open. Lillian stood there in jeans and a soft blue sweater, her silver hair pulled back, her smile tentative but genuine. She looked better than Thursday, steadier, less haunted, but Miles could still see the fragility underneath. Hi, she said softly. Grandma! Sophie launched herself forward, and Lillian caught her in a hug that made them both laugh. Hello, sweetheart. Oh, you're getting so big. That's what everyone says. I think I'm the same size as yesterday. Well, you look taller to me. Lillian's eyes were already wet, and Miles felt something in his chest constrict. 3 days ago, this woman had been convinced she was invisible. Now she was holding his daughter like she was the most precious thing in the world. We brought you stuff, Sophie announced, pulling back. Flowers and a card and a bracelet, and Dad made lasagna. You didn't have to do all that. Miles stepped forward, offering the flowers. Sophie insisted, and I like cooking, so it's no trouble. Lillian took the bouquet carefully, her fingers brushing his for just a second. They're beautiful. Come in, please. You're letting all the cold air in. The house smelled like cinnamon and vanilla, warm and inviting in a way that suggested Lillian had been baking. The living room was neat without being sterile, family photos on the mantel, comfortable furniture that had been chosen for use rather than style, a bookshelf stuffed with paperbacks and hardcovers in no particular order. Miles spotted a photo of Angela and Lillian from what looked like 10 years ago, both of them laughing at something off camera. He looked away quickly, uncomfortable with the reminder that Lillian was technically family in the most complicated sense. The kitchen's this way, Lillian said, leading them through. I made cookies, but I didn't know if Sophie still liked chocolate chip, or if her tastes had changed. I love chocolate chip, Sophie interrupted. Can I have one? After dinner, Miles said automatically, but Grandma made them special. After dinner, Lillian smiled, the expression more relaxed now. Your dad's right, but I promise they'll still taste good in an hour. Sophie sighed with the dramatic suffering of childhood injustice, but didn't argue further. Miles set the lasagna on the counter, trying not to notice how clean and organized everything was. The kind of kitchen that saw too little use, too few people creating the necessary chaos of living. Can I show you my card now? Sophie asked. already pulling the envelope from her pocket. I'd love to see it. Sophie handed it over with ceremony, and Lillian opened it slowly, like it was something sacred. Her expression went soft as she read the inside, and when she looked at Sophie, tears were sliding down her cheeks. "Oh, sweetheart, this is the most wonderful card I've ever received." "Really? Really? Can I keep it forever?" "That's what cards are for." Lillian laughed, pressing the card to her chest. "Thank you. I'll treasure it." "And I made you this." Sophie produced the rubber band bracelet with a flourish. "It's purple and blue because those are your favorite colors." Lillian's face crumpled. She took the bracelet with trembling hands and slipped it over her wrist, adjusting it carefully. "It's perfect. How did you know those were my favorite colors?" "You told me last time I visited. You said purple was peaceful and blue was like the sky." "You remembered that?" "I remember everything you tell me." Miles watched Lillian struggle to compose herself, watched her wipe her eyes and smile at Sophie like the sun had just come out. This was what she needed. Not strangers validating her worth through dating apps, but the simple proof that she already mattered to the people who knew her. "Why don't you give me the house tour while the lasagna heats up?" Miles suggested, giving Lillian a moment to collect herself. "Oh, you don't want to see my boring house." "I do, actually. Sophie's told me about your garden." That brightened Lillian's expression. "Would you like to see it? It's mostly done for the season, but the mums are still blooming." They followed her through the house to a sliding door that opened onto a small backyard that had been transformed into something quietly magical. Raised beds held the remnants of summer vegetables. A stone path wound through carefully planned flower beds, and against the back fence, a riot of chrysanthemums bloomed in gold and rust and deep burgundy. "Wow," Miles said, genuinely impressed. "You did all this yourself?" "It gives me something to do, and I like watching things grow." Lillian walked down the path, pointing out different plants. "The tomatoes were incredible this year. I canned 20 jars of sauce, more than I'll ever use, but I couldn't stand to waste them." "I'll take some," Miles offered. "I'm terrible at meal planning. Homemade sauce would be a lifesaver." "Really?" "Really." Lillian's smile was shy. "I'd like that. It's nice to cook for someone besides myself." Sophie had already wandered off to examine a bird feeder, leaving Miles and Lillian standing in the autumn garden with comfortable silence settling between them. "How have you been?" Miles asked quietly. "Since Thursday." Lillian's shoulders tensed slightly. "Better. The first night was hard. I kept replaying everything, imagining what people were saying. But then Sophie called, and that helped. And your texts helped." She looked at him. "You didn't have to check in every day?" "I wanted to." "Why?" Miles considered his answer carefully. "Because I know what it's like to spiral after something humiliating happens. I know how easy it is to convince yourself that everyone's talking about you, judging you, writing you off, and I didn't want you to sit alone with those thoughts." "Did it work?" "Did what work?" "Your texts. Did they actually help, or was I just being polite?" Miles smiled. "You tell me." Lillian was quiet for a moment, watching Sophie try to coax a squirrel closer with whispered encouragement. "They helped," she admitted. "They reminded me that someone was thinking about me, that I wasn't as invisible as I felt." "You're not invisible." "I'm starting to believe that. Slowly." "Good." They stood there watching Sophie, the afternoon sun slanting golden across the garden. Miles felt something shift. Not romantic, despite Sophie's matchmaking theories, but something warmer than friendship and more significant than obligation. Recognition, maybe. The kind that came from shared experience and mutual understanding. "I deleted the app," Lillian said abruptly. "The dating one. I told you that already, didn't I?" "You did." "I keep thinking maybe I shouldn't have. Maybe I should try again, not give up just because one person was cruel." She wrapped her arms around herself. "But then I think about walking into another coffee shop, waiting for another stranger to decide if I'm worth their time, and I can't." "Then don't." "But everyone says I should put myself out there, that I can't meet anyone if I don't try." "Everyone's wrong." Miles turned to face her fully. "You don't owe the world your vulnerability just because people think you should. If you want to try dating again someday, great. But if you don't, that's okay too. Your life doesn't need to look like anyone else's to be worth living. Lillian's eyes filled. That's easy to say. It's true to say. And I'm not suggesting you become a hermit. I'm saying maybe connection doesn't have to look like romance. Maybe it looks like this: gardens and grandkids and people who actually see you. Is that enough? I don't know. Is it? Lillian looked at Sophie, who was now lying on her stomach trying to peek under a bush at something that had caught her attention. When Richard died, everyone told me I needed to move on. Find someone new. Not spend the rest of my life alone, and I tried to believe them. That's why I downloaded the app in the first place. But maybe they were wrong. Maybe moving on doesn't mean replacing what I lost. Maybe it just means finding new ways to feel alive. Miles felt that sentence land somewhere deep. Yeah, maybe it does. Sophie jumped up suddenly, brushing dirt off her jeans. Dad, there's a toad under the bush. Can we keep it? No, but it's so cute. Toads live outside. That's discriminatory. Miles bit back a laugh. That's ecology. Come on, let's go inside. Lasagna should be ready. They ate dinner at Lillian's dining room table, a formal space that clearly hadn't seen regular use in years. But Lillian had set it carefully. Real plates, cloth napkins, flowers from the garden in a simple vase. Like this meal mattered. Like they mattered. Sophie dominated the conversation with stories from school, her dramatic retelling of the substitute teacher saga, and approximately 15 questions about whether Lillian had ever seen a toad turn into a prince. Lillian answered each question with the kind of patient attention that most adults couldn't sustain, and Miles watched the light come back into her eyes with every exchange. This was what she'd been missing. Not romance, not validation from strangers, just connection, purpose. The simple knowledge that her presence meant something to someone. After dinner, Sophie insisted on helping with dishes, which mostly involved her standing on a stool and creating more bubbles than clean plates. Miles and Lillian worked around her chaos, falling into an easy rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. She's wonderful, Lillian said quietly, handing Miles a plate to dry. She is, even when she's exhausting. You're doing a great job with her. I'm surviving with her. There's a difference. Lillian smiled. You always say that. But Miles, look at her. She's happy, confident, kind. That doesn't happen by accident. Miles looked at Sophie, who was now conducting an opera for the dish soap bottle, and felt his throat tighten. I just try not to screw up too badly. That's all any parent can do. They finished the dishes in comfortable silence, and then Sophie declared it was time for cookies. They moved to the living room, where Lillian had already set out a plate of chocolate chip cookies that were still slightly warm. Sophie took one bite and declared them the best cookies in the universe, which made Lillian blush with pleasure. Miles tried one and had to agree. They were exceptional, the kind of homemade perfection that came from someone who'd spent years getting the recipe exactly right. You should sell these, he said. Lillian laughed. Who would buy cookies from a random old woman? You're not random, you're not old, and these are incredible. I'm serious. You could make a business out of this. Miles, I mean it. Every parent at Sophie's school would pay good money for homemade cookies this good. Birthday parties, school events. You could build a whole thing. Lillian looked at him like he'd suggested she fly to the moon. I couldn't do that. Why not? Because I'm 62 and I've never run a business and I don't even know where I'd start. You start small. Make cookies for one event. See how it goes. Build from there. Sophie perked up. You could make cookies for my birthday. It's in 2 months and Dad always buys gross grocery store cake. Hey, Miles protested. Those cakes are fine. They're dry and the frosting tastes like chemicals. Tell me how you really feel. I just did. Lillian laughed, a real laugh that reached her eyes. If you want me to make your birthday cake, sweetheart, I'd be honored. Really? Really, what kind do you want? Chocolate with raspberry filling. And can you make it look like a castle? Sophie, see, Miles started. I can try, Lillian said, already looking more animated than Miles had seen her all week. I've never done a castle, but I could learn. Sophie launched into detailed specifications about turrets and drawbridges while Miles watched Lillian transform. This was it. This was what she needed. Not pity or rescue, but purpose. A reason to get up in the morning that wasn't just filling time until bedtime. They stayed until almost 7, long past when Miles had planned to leave. Sophie eventually crashed on Lillian's couch mid-sentence, exhausted from excitement, and Miles carefully gathered her up. "Thank you for today," Lillian said at the door, her voice thick. "For bringing her. For dinner. For everything. Thank you for having us. Miles," she hesitated. "I meant what I said Thursday, about you being a good man. I don't think you hear that enough." Miles felt heat creep up his neck. "I'm just doing what anyone would do." "No. You're doing what good people do. There's a difference." Lillian reached out and squeezed his arm gently. "Thank you for reminding me I'm not invisible. You never were. Some people just weren't looking." Miles carried Sophie to the truck, buckled her in while she mumbled something about toads and cookies, and drove home through quiet streets. His phone buzzed at a red light. A text from Lillian. "I'm going to do it. The cookie business. Small at first, but I'm going to try." Miles smiled and typed back with one hand. "Good. You're going to be amazing." The response came immediately. "I'm terrified. That's how you know it matters." He pulled into his apartment complex, carried Sophie inside, and got her ready for bed with the practiced efficiency of single parenthood. She was asleep before he finished reading the first page of her bedtime story. Miles stood in her doorway for a long moment, watching her breathe, feeling the weight of responsibility and love that never got lighter but somehow became easier to carry. His phone buzzed again. Another text from Lillian. "Thank you for believing in me." Miles looked at those words, thought about Thursday afternoon and white roses and the way small acts of kindness could reshape someone's entire world. He typed back, "Thank you for teaching me what that looks like." The following Tuesday, Miles was installing crown molding in a McMansion that smelled like new money and poor decisions when his phone rang. He almost didn't answer. The homeowner was the type who hovered and second-guessed every cut. But Lillian's name on the screen made him set down his nail gun. "Hey," he said, stepping into the hallway for privacy. "Everything okay?" "I did something impulsive." Lillian's voice was breathless, nervous. "And I need to tell someone before I lose my nerve and undo it." Miles felt his stomach drop. "What happened?" "I registered a business license for the cookies, and I made a Facebook page, and I posted about Sophie's birthday cake." The words tumbled out fast, like confession. "Is that crazy?" "It feels crazy. I've gotten 12 messages already asking about orders, and I don't even have prices figured out. And what if I can't actually do this?" And thought, "Lillian, breathe." A pause. Then a shaky exhale. "Now tell me why you think this is crazy," Miles said calmly. "Because I'm 62 years old starting a business I know nothing about based on one conversation where you were probably just being nice." "I wasn't being nice. I was being honest. Your cookies are incredible, and clearly other people agree if you've already got 12 inquiries. But what if I mess up? What if someone gets sick from my baking, or I take too many orders and can't deliver, or I charge too much or too little, or then you'll figure it out. That's what running a business is, making mistakes and adjusting." Miles leaned against the wall, aware that the homeowner was probably timing his break. "What did the messages say?" "Most of them are asking about birthday cakes. A few want cookie platters for parties. One woman wants to know if I do wedding cakes." Lillian laughed, high and tight. "Wedding cakes, Miles? I've never made a wedding cake in my life." "So you tell her that. You tell her what you can do and build from there." "What if what I can do isn't enough?" "It will be. Trust me." Silence stretched across the line, and Miles could practically hear Lillian warring with herself. Hope versus fear, possibility versus safety. "I made a price list," she finally said, "based on what I spent on ingredients for Sophie's cake. Does that make sense?" "Makes perfect sense. And I set up a separate email for orders. That's professional, right?" "Very professional." "Miles?" "Yeah?" "Thank you for pushing me. I wouldn't have done this without you." "You would have. Just might have taken longer." "I'm terrified." "Good. Means it matters." Lillian laughed, and this time it sounded almost genuine. "I should let you get back to work. I just needed to tell someone who wouldn't think I'm having a midlife crisis 20 years too late." "You're not having a crisis. You're having a breakthrough. There's a difference." After they hung up, Miles stood in the hallway for another minute, smiling at nothing. The homeowner appeared in the doorway, looking irritated about the delay, and Miles got back to work without apologizing. Some interruptions were worth it. That evening, Sophie had a meltdown about math homework that turned into tears about how everyone at school had both parents, and she only had one, and it wasn't fair. Miles held her while she cried, offering comfort he didn't know if she could hear, and eventually she wore herself out and fell asleep on the couch. He carried her to bed, feeling the familiar ache of inadequacy that came with single parenthood. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't be two people, couldn't fill every gap or answer every need or fix every hurt. His phone buzzed, a text from Lillian. Just got my first official order, birthday cake for a 6-year-old, dinosaur theme. I'm Googling how to make fondant scales. Miles typed back, "You've got this. I really don't. You'll figure it out. That's what YouTube tutorials are for. You have way too much faith in me. Someone has to." A pause, then, "How's Sophie?" Miles looked toward Sophie's bedroom, where his daughter was sleeping off her emotional exhaustion. "Rough night, missing her mom. I'm sorry. That's hard." "Yeah. Does she want to come over this week? I could use a taste tester for cake samples." Miles felt something loosen in his chest. She'd love that. Thursday after school? Perfect. And Miles? "You're doing better than you think. Sophie's lucky to have you." He stared at those words, wanting to believe them but feeling the weight of every mistake and shortcoming pressing down. "Thanks. She's lucky to have you too. We're lucky to have each other." Miles set down his phone and sat in the quiet apartment, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and distant traffic. Loneliness was a strange thing. You could be surrounded by love and still feel it, could be doing everything right and still wonder if it was enough. But maybe that was the point. Maybe enough wasn't a destination but a practice, something you had to choose to believe every day despite evidence to the contrary. Thursday afternoon, Sophie practically vibrated with excitement the entire drive to Lillian's house. She'd brought her dinosaur encyclopedia, 3 drawings she'd made specifically for this visit, and a rock she'd found that was definitely special, though she couldn't explain why. Lillian met them at the door wearing an apron dusted with flour and a smile that looked more settled than it had the previous Saturday. The house smelled like vanilla and butter, warm and inviting in a way that made Miles's stomach rumble. "I made 3 different cake flavors," Lillian announced as Sophie barreled through the door. "Chocolate, vanilla, and lemon. You're going to tell me which one is best." "Can I try all of them?" Sophie asked. "That's the plan." "This is the best day ever," Lillian laughed, leading them to the kitchen where 3 small cakes sat cooling on racks. She'd already prepared sample slices on small plates, each one perfectly portioned. "You didn't have to go to all this trouble," Miles said. "It's not trouble, it's practice." Lillian handed Sophie a fork, "And I need honest opinions. If something tastes bad, you have to tell me." Sophie took her job with deadly seriousness, trying each cake with the focused concentration of a professional critic. She made thoughtful humming sounds, compared textures, and finally declared that the chocolate was best, but the lemon was fancy in a good way. "What about the vanilla?" Lillian asked. "It's good, but kind of boring, like it needs something extra." "Like what?" Sophie considered. "Maybe raspberry? Or that white cream stuff you put in fancy cakes?" "Buttercream? Yeah, that." Lillian made notes on a pad of paper, looking more energized than Miles had ever seen her. This was what purpose looked like. Not grand gestures or life-changing moments, but small tasks that mattered to someone. "How many orders do you have now?" Miles asked, accepting a slice of lemon cake that was indeed fancy in a good way. 17, 3 birthday cakes, 2 cookie platters, and 12 dozen assorted cookies for a company event. Lillian's voice held equal parts pride and panic. "The company event is in 2 weeks. I'll need to start baking next week to have everything ready." "That's amazing." "That's terrifying. What if I can't do it?" "You'll do it." "How do you know?" Miles gestured to the 3 perfect cakes on the counter. "Because you just made 3 different cakes to test for 1 order. You're not half-assing this. You're going to show up, do the work, and deliver something incredible." Lillian looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You really believe that?" "I do." "Why?" "Because I've seen you with Sophie. I've seen how much care you put into everything you do." That doesn't change just because you're getting paid for it. Sophie looked up from her cake, vanilla buttercream on her nose. Grandma, these are really good. You should make 1,000,000 of them. I don't know about 1,000,000. Dad, tell her. Tell her she should make 1,000,000 cakes. Miles smiled. Maybe start with 17 and work your way up. They spent the next hour in the kitchen while Lillian showed Sophie how to properly cream butter and sugar, explaining the science of baking in terms an 8-year-old could understand. Sophie absorbed every word with the kind of attention she rarely gave her homework, and Miles watched from the kitchen table, feeling something warm and complicated settle in his chest. This was what family looked like when it worked. Not perfection or constant harmony, but showing up for each other in small ways that added up to something bigger. Lillian needed purpose and connection. Sophie needed another adult who saw her as more than a responsibility, and Miles needed proof that kindness could still matter in a world that often felt too hard and too cynical. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Is this Miles Harper? He frowned, typing back. Yes. Who's this? Robert Chen. Lillian's neighbor. We need to talk about what happened at the coffee shop last week. Miles felt his stomach drop. He glanced at Lillian, who was helping Sophie measure flour, completely absorbed in the task. What about it? He typed carefully. People are talking, making assumptions. I thought you should know. What kind of assumptions? That you and Lillian are together, that you're taking advantage of a vulnerable woman, that the whole thing was staged for attention. Miles's jaw clenched. None of that is true. I know, but perception matters, and right now the perception isn't good. Why are you telling me this? Because Lillian's a good person who's been through enough. She doesn't need gossip making her life harder. And you seem like someone who cares about that. Miles stared at his phone, anger and frustration warring with the knowledge that Robert wasn't wrong. People loved a story, especially one that confirmed their assumptions about lonely women and opportunistic men. What do you suggest I do? He typed. Be careful. Keep things appropriate. Don't give people ammunition. We're not doing anything wrong. Doesn't matter. People see what they want to see. The conversation ended there, and Miles set down his phone feeling like he'd been punched. He'd known on some level that sitting with Lillian at the cafe would create talk, but he'd chosen to do it anyway because it was the right thing. Now that choice was being twisted into something ugly, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Dad? Sophie's voice pulled him back. Are you okay? You look mad. I'm fine, kiddo. Just work stuff. You always say that when something's wrong. Miles forced a smile. I'm really fine. Promise. But Sophie wasn't convinced, and neither was Lillian, who'd gone quiet and watchful. She waited until Sophie went to wash her hands before speaking. What happened? Nothing important. Miles. He sighed, debating how much to share. Your neighbor texted me. Robert Chen. He said people are talking about us. Lillian's face went pale. Talking how? Making assumptions. About the coffee shop. About us. What kind of assumptions? Miles hesitated, not wanting to hurt her, but knowing she'd find out eventually. That we're together. That I'm taking advantage of you. That the whole thing was staged. Lillian sat down heavily, her hands gripping the edge of the table. I knew this would happen. I told you people would talk. Let them talk. Easy for you to say. You're not the pathetic old woman who... Don't. Miles's voice was sharp. Don't do that. Don't let their narrative become your truth. But what if they're right? What if I am pathetic? What if this whole thing, you being nice to me, helping me, spending time here, what if it is all some kind of pity project? It's not. How do I know that? Because I'm here when I don't have to be. Because Sophie genuinely loves you. Because you matter to us. And gossip from strangers doesn't change that. Lillian's eyes filled. But what if the gossip affects Sophie? What if kids at school say things, or their parents, or... Then we deal with it, together. Miles, I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm choosing. He leaned forward, making sure she heard every word. I don't care what people say. I care that you're building something good here. I care that Sophie has her grandmother in her life. I care that you're remembering you're not invisible. Everything else is noise. But no buts. You get to decide what matters. Not Robert Chen, not random people at a coffee shop. You! Sophie returned, oblivious to the tension, and announced she wanted to make cookies. Lillian wiped her eyes quickly and stood, moving toward the ingredients with the kind of forced cheer that broke Miles's heart a little. They made cookies. Chocolate chip, because Sophie declared them superior to all other varieties. And Lillian taught her the secret to perfect cookies was patience and butter at room temperature. Sophie took notes in a small notebook she'd brought for exactly this purpose, and Miles watched them work together, seeing the bond that had nothing to do with obligation and everything to do with genuine affection. When the first batch came out of the oven, Sophie burned her tongue trying to eat one too soon and declared it worth it. Lillian laughed despite everything, and for a moment the worry lifted from her face. They left around 6, Sophie carrying a container of cookies and promises to return soon. Miles helped load everything into the truck, while Lillian stood in the doorway, arms wrapped around herself against the evening chill. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for today. For not running when things got complicated. I told you, I'm not running. But you should. I'm not worth all this trouble." Miles walked back to where she stood, close enough to see the fear and hope warring in her expression. "You're worth more than you know, and I'm going to keep showing up until you believe it." "Why?" "Because someone did it for me once, and because you're Sophie's grandmother, and because you deserve people in your life who see you for who you actually are, not who strangers decide you should be." Lillian's face crumpled. "I don't know how to do this. How to believe I matter when everything tells me I don't. You do it one day at a time. One cookie order, one conversation, one moment of choosing to believe you're worth the space you take up." "That sounds exhausting." "It is, but it gets easier." Lillian looked at him for a long moment, and Miles saw the exact second she made a decision, not to believe him completely, but to try, to keep trying. "Okay," she whispered, "one day at a time." That's all any of us can do. He drove home with Sophie chattering about cookie recipes and whether they could get an oven like Grandma's. Miles listened with half his attention, the other half stuck on Robert Chen's warning and Lillian's fear and the knowledge that kindness always came with a cost. But some costs were worth paying. That night, after Sophie was asleep, Miles sat at his kitchen table with his laptop and Googled how to handle gossip. The articles were useless, all platitudes about ignoring haters and living your truth. But one comment on a forum caught his attention. "People talk until something more interesting comes along. Don't give them more to work with, but don't hide either. Just live your life. Simple advice, probably impossible to follow." His phone buzzed, a text from Lillian. "I'm sorry about today. About the gossip, about making things complicated." Miles typed back, "You didn't make anything complicated. People did. And we're handling it, are we?" "We are. Stop apologizing for existing. That's harder than it sounds. I know. Do it anyway." A long pause, then, "The dinosaur cake turned out amazing. I sent you a picture." Miles opened the attachment and saw a 3-layer chocolate cake decorated with fondant scales in shades of green and brown, a tiny T-Rex on top made with impressive detail. It was professional quality, the kind of thing you'd see in a bakery window. "That's incredible," he typed. "You're really doing this. I'm really trying. That's the same thing." "Is it?" "Yeah, it is." Another pause. "Thank you for not giving up on me." Miles stared at those words, feeling the weight of them. Thank you for not giving up on yourself. He set down his phone and sat in the quiet apartment, thinking about choices and consequences and the way small acts of showing up could ripple outward in ways you never anticipated. He'd walked into that coffee shop looking for peace and found responsibility instead. The responsibility of seeing someone who needed to be seen and choosing not to look away. It would have been easier to walk past. Safer to mind his own business. But easy and safe didn't always mean right. And Miles was tired of choosing easy. The weekend came with rain and Sophie's field trip to the science museum she'd been anticipating for weeks. Miles dropped her off at school, watched her run toward the bus with her packed lunch and barely contained excitement, and felt the strange mix of pride and loss that came with watching your kid need you less. He spent the morning finishing a job, the afternoon running errands, and was home by 3 when his phone rang. Lillian's name on the screen made him answer immediately. "Everything okay?" he asked. "I need your help." Her voice was tight, controlled. "The woman who ordered the company cookies just called. She's coming to pick them up tonight instead of tomorrow, and I'm not ready. I'm nowhere near ready. Miles checked the time. What do you have left to do? Decorate 4 dozen cookies, box everything, make sure it looks professional enough that she doesn't regret hiring me. Lillian's breath hitched. I can't do this alone. I thought I could, but I can't. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Miles, you don't have to. I know, I'll be there anyway. He made it in 15, parking in the driveway and jogging to the door through drizzling rain. Lillian let him in, her hair escaping from its usually neat style, flour on her cheek, exhaustion and panic in her eyes. Thank you for coming, she said, voice breaking slightly. I know this is ridiculous. I'm a grown woman who should be able to handle a simple cookie order. It's not ridiculous, and you can handle it. You just need help, which is different than failing. Miles followed her to the kitchen, which looked like a bakery had exploded. Cookies covered every surface, icing in various colors waited in piping bags, and Lillian's careful notes were scattered among the chaos. Okay, Miles said, rolling up his sleeves. Tell me what to do. They worked side by side for the next 4 hours, Lillian decorating with precision while Miles boxed finished cookies and kept the kitchen from descending into complete disaster. She talked while she worked, about her fears that she wasn't good enough, that she'd made a mistake starting this business, that people would laugh when they saw what she'd created. Miles listened and contradicted every negative thought with facts. The cookies were beautiful. The orders kept coming. She was building something real. By 7:30, 12 dozen cookies sat in professional-looking boxes tied with ribbon. They were stunning, each one decorated with the company's logo in precise detail, colors perfectly matched to their branding. Lillian stared at them with something like disbelief. We did it. You did it. I just provided moral support in box assembly. Miles, I mean it. This is your work, your vision, your business. The doorbell rang at 7:45. A well-dressed woman in her 40s stood on the porch with an umbrella, looking professional and slightly skeptical. That skepticism vanished the second she saw the cookies. Oh my God, she breathed. These are perfect. Better than perfect. Lillian flushed with pleasure, carefully loading boxes into the woman's car while accepting praise that she clearly didn't know how to process. Miles watched from the doorway, feeling pride swell in his chest. When the woman drove away, Lillian came back inside and burst into tears. Miles let her cry, offering silent presence until she could speak. I didn't think I could do it, she whispered. I really didn't think I could. But you did. We did. No, you did. I just showed up. Lillian looked at him with red eyes and a trembling smile. Showing up matters. Yeah, it does. They cleaned the kitchen together, and Miles realized he'd picked up Sophie from the field trip hours ago if she'd been going. Then remembered it was Friday, and she was at Angela's for the weekend, a detail that had slipped his mind in the chaos. You should go, Lillian said, putting away the last of the dishes. You've already given up your whole evening. I'm not in a hurry. Miles, Sophie's at her mom's. I've got nowhere to be. He leaned against the counter. Unless you want me to leave. No, I just don't want you to feel obligated. I don't feel obligated. I feel useful. There's a difference. Lillian smiled, small but genuine. I made too much dinner. Are you hungry? They ate leftover soup at her kitchen table, talking about Sophie's field trip and cookie orders and whether Lillian should raise her prices. It was comfortable, easy, the kind of conversation that happened between people who'd moved past small talk into actual friendship. Can I ask you something? Lillian said eventually. Always. Why are you really doing this? And don't say it's because I helped you after the divorce. This is more than that. Miles considered his answer carefully. When Angela left, I spent months feeling invisible, like I'd been erased from my own life. Work was work. Sophie was the one bright spot, but everything else felt hollow, like I was going through motions without purpose. Lillian waited. And then I saw you in that café, and I recognized that look, that feeling of being invisible while the world moved on, and I realized I could walk past like everyone else, or I could sit down and prove to both of us that we still mattered. So this is about you feeling better about yourself. Maybe. Partly. Miles met her eyes. But mostly it's about believing that showing up for people still means something, that kindness isn't wasted, that we can choose to see each other even when it's inconvenient. Lillian's expression softened. You're a better person than you think you are. I'm just someone who remembers what it felt like to be forgotten, and I don't want that for anyone else. They sat in comfortable silence, the kitchen warm and bright, rain pattering against the windows. Miles felt something shift, not romance, but something deeper, recognition, partnership, the knowledge that sometimes the most important relationships were the ones that didn't fit neat categories. His phone buzzed. A text from Angela. Sophie wants to FaceTime. She has something to show you. Miles smiled, pulling up FaceTime. Sophie's face appeared, gap-toothed grin and wild hair. Dad, guess what? What? Mom's boyfriend has a puppy, and I got to pet it, and it's so cute, and can we get a puppy? We've talked about this. But Dad, it was so soft, and it liked me. Mom said... Sophie paused, noticing something behind Miles. Is that Grandma Lillian's house? Miles turned the phone so Lillian could wave. Hi, sweetheart. What are you doing there? Sophie asked with the blunt curiosity of children. Your grandmother needed help with a cookie order. I came over to help. Oh, that's nice. Sophie's attention was already drifting. Mom says I have to go. Love you, Dad. Love you, Grandma. The call ended, and Miles set down his phone, aware that Angela would probably have questions. She's going to ask, Lillian said quietly. Let her. Miles. I'm not hiding our friendship because people might gossip. Sophie knows you. She loves you. That's what matters. Lillian nodded, not entirely convinced, but willing to trust him. Miles left around 10, driving home through rain that had settled into steady rhythm. His apartment felt too quiet without Sophie, but for once the silence didn't feel lonely. It felt peaceful. His phone buzzed as he was getting ready for bed. A text from Lillian. Thank you for tonight, for everything. I couldn't have done it without you. Miles smiled, typing back. Yes, you could have, but I'm glad you didn't have to. You're stubborn. So are you. We'll get along fine. A response came through immediately. I'm learning, slowly. Miles set his phone on the nightstand and lay in the dark, listening to rain drum against the window. He thought about choices and consequences, about the way one decision in a coffee shop had rippled outward into something neither of them had anticipated. He'd sat down to prove Lillian wasn't invisible, and somehow in the process, he'd proven the same thing to himself. The weekend passed quietly. Sophie came home Sunday evening with stories about the puppy and Angela's new boyfriend and a science project she'd completely forgotten about that was due Wednesday. Miles helped her build a model of the solar system using foam balls and wire hangers, listened to her practice her presentation 17 times, and tried not to think about the fact that Angela hadn't asked a single question about him being at Lillian's house. Monday morning brought a text from Lillian at 6:30, which was unusual enough to make Miles check his phone before coffee. The woman from the company event posted photos of the cookies on social media. Tagged my business page. I have 43 new messages asking about orders. Miles smiled, typing back, That's incredible. Told you people would love them. I don't know if I can handle this many orders. So you say no to some, or you raise your prices, or you figure out what's sustainable and work within that. You make it sound simple. It is simple. Not easy, but simple. A pause. Then, will you help me figure out pricing? I don't want to charge too much or too little. Absolutely. Tonight after Sophie's in bed? That works. Thank you. Miles poured his coffee, feeling the warm satisfaction of watching someone he cared about succeed. It was different than the pride he felt for Sophie. Less parental, more collaborative. Like they were building something together, even though Lillian was doing all the actual work. The week unfolded in a rhythm that was becoming familiar. Miles worked his construction jobs, picked up Sophie from school, helped with homework that was getting progressively harder, and texted with Lillian about business strategy, ingredient costs, and whether she should invest in better equipment. Their conversations had evolved past surface pleasantries into something more substantial, shared problems, honest advice, the kind of friendship that developed when two people stopped performing and started being real. Thursday afternoon, Miles was replacing a broken window when his phone rang. Angela's name on the screen made his stomach clench reflexively. A learned response from too many arguments about custody and child support and who was really doing the hard work of parenting. "Hey," he answered cautiously, "we need to talk." Angela's voice was tight, controlled, in the way that meant she was angry but trying to sound reasonable. "About your relationship with my mother." Miles felt ice slide down his spine. "What about it?" "Sophie mentioned you were at Mom's house on Friday night, that you've been spending time there, taking her there for visits." Angela paused. "Miles, what's going on?" "Nothing's going on. Lillian's Sophie's grandmother. They have a relationship. I facilitate that. By spending evenings at her house? By helping with her little baking hobby? That seems like more than facilitation. Her baking isn't a hobby. It's a business. And yes, I've been helping because she's family, and she needed support." "She's not your family anymore. We're divorced." Miles felt anger spark hot in his chest. "Maybe she's not your family either, considering you've called her maybe twice since you moved to Seattle. But she's definitely Sophie's family, and I'm not going to punish her for your choices." "That's not fair, isn't it? When's the last time you asked your mother how she was doing? When's the last time you visited? Or even sent a text that wasn't about scheduling Sophie's visits?" Silence crackled across the line. "That's what I thought," Miles continued, his voice hard now. "You don't get to abandon Lillian and then police who shows up for her. She's been there for Sophie and for me when she didn't have to be. So yeah, I'm helping her build her business, and I'm going to keep helping her because that's what decent people do." "People are talking, Miles, saying things about you too, about your motives. Let them talk. It affects Sophie. Kids at school are asking her questions, making comments." That stopped Miles cold. "What kind of comments?" "About whether you and my mother are dating, about whether that's weird, about whether Sophie's okay with it." Angela's voice softened slightly. "She came to me confused, Miles. She didn't know how to answer." Miles closed his eyes, pressing his thumb and forefinger against the bridge of his nose. "What did you tell her?" "That you and Mom are friends, that friends help each other, that it's normal and she doesn't need to worry about it." "Thank you. But Miles, you need to be careful. I know Mom's been lonely since Dad died. I know I haven't been there as much as I should be. But she's vulnerable right now, and if people think you're taking advantage, I'm not taking advantage of anyone." Miles's voice was ice. "I sat down at a coffee shop when your mother was being humiliated by some asshole on a bad date. I stayed when everyone else was happy to watch her suffer. And I've continued to show up because she matters, to Sophie, and to me as a friend. If you have a problem with that, it says more about you than it does about me." Another silence, longer this time. "I didn't know about the coffee shop," Angela said quietly. "Why would you? You don't call her." "That's not fair. I'm building a career. I have a life here. And she had a life there. A life that included you until you decided Seattle was more important than family." "Miles, I'm not trying to replace you, Angela. I'm trying to make sure Sophie doesn't lose her grandmother the same way she lost half her family after we divorced. If you want to be part of your mother's life, great. She'd love that. But don't criticize me for filling a gap you created." The words hung there, sharp and true. "I should go," Angela said finally, her voice thick. "But Miles, thank you for being there for her. I mean that." The call ended before Miles could respond. He stood in the half-finished room, surrounded by tools and sawdust, feeling the familiar exhaustion that came from fighting battles he never wanted to fight. He wasn't trying to be a hero, wasn't trying to prove anything. He was just showing up for people who needed someone to show up. Apparently that was still controversial. That evening, after Sophie was asleep, Miles called Lillian. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm. "Hey, I was just thinking about you." "Good thoughts, I hope." "Grateful thoughts. I finalized 3 more cake orders today. I'm officially booked through the end of next month." Miles smiled despite the heaviness in his chest. "That's amazing. You're really doing this." "I really am." A pause. "You sound tired. Everything okay?" Angela called. "Oh." The warmth drained from Lillian's voice. What did she say? Miles debated sugarcoating it, but decided Lillian deserved honesty. "She's heard the gossip about us. She wanted to make sure I wasn't taking advantage of you." "What did you tell her?" "That we're friends. That I'm helping you because you matter. That she doesn't get to abandon you and then police who shows up." Lillian was quiet for a long moment. You said that to her? Yeah. Miles, she's Sophie's mother. You shouldn't have. Yes, I should have. Someone needed to tell her the truth. Miles sat down heavily on his couch. She also said kids at Sophie's school are asking questions, making comments about us. Oh no. Lillian's voice went small. This is exactly what I was afraid of. Sophie shouldn't have to deal with this because of me. She shouldn't have to deal with it because people are making assumptions. There's a difference. But if it's affecting her, then we talk to her about it. We make sure she knows the truth and that she's okay. But we don't disappear from each other's lives because gossip makes things uncomfortable. Miles, maybe we should take a step back. Give people time to forget. Let things settle. No. No. No, Miles repeated firmly. I'm not walking away because people can't mind their own business. You're building something good. Sophie loves you. We're friends. Those are the facts, and I'm not apologizing for any of them. But Sophie is smart enough to understand that sometimes people say stupid things, and she's strong enough to handle it, especially if we're honest with her. Miles paused. Unless you want me to back off. If this is too much for you, I'll respect that. But don't pull away because you think you're protecting me or Sophie. We get to make our own choices. Lillian's breath hitched across the line. I don't want you to back off. Then we keep going, together. Even if people keep talking? Especially then. Because giving them what they want, us disappearing, you going back to being invisible, that's letting cruelty win, and I'm done with that. Silence stretched between them, and Miles could practically hear Lillian processing, weighing fear against hope. Okay, she whispered finally. We keep going. Good. But Miles? What if Angela's right? What if this is affecting Sophie more than we know? Then we'll find out. Tomorrow I'll talk to her. Ask her directly what she's hearing and how she feels about it. And we'll handle it based on what she actually needs, not what we're afraid she might need. You make everything sound manageable. That's because it is. We just have to stop catastrophizing and deal with what's actually in front of us. Lillian laughed, watery but genuine. When did you get so wise? I'm not wise. I'm just tired of letting fear make my decisions. They talked for another hour about nothing important, favorite movies, childhood memories, the stray cat that had started appearing in Lillian's garden. Easy conversation that reminded Miles why he'd sat down in that coffee shop in the first place. Not because Lillian needed saving, but because she deserved to be seen, and somewhere along the way, she'd started seeing him back. The next morning, Miles made Sophie pancakes and waited until she'd eaten 3 before broaching the subject. So, Mom mentioned some kids at school have been asking you questions. Sophie looked up, syrup on her chin. Yeah. What kind of questions? She shrugged, suddenly very interested in cutting her pancakes into precise squares. Just stuff about you and Grandma Lillian. What kind of stuff? If you're boyfriend and girlfriend. If that's weird because she's old. If I'm okay with it. Sophie's voice was matter-of-fact, but Miles saw tension in her shoulders. And what did you tell them? That you're friends, that friends help each other, that Grandma makes really good cookies. She finally looked up. Is that okay? That's perfect. Is it bothering you, the questions? Sophie considered this with the seriousness of someone twice her age. A little, because some kids make it sound weird, like there's something wrong with you being friends with Grandma. Do you think there's something wrong with it? No, I think it's nice. Grandma was sad before, and now she's happy. And you're happy when you help her, so I don't understand why people care. Miles felt his throat tighten. People care because they like to have opinions about things that aren't their business. But you're right. Grandma was sad, and now she's building something that makes her happy. And I'm glad I can help with that. So you're not boyfriend and girlfriend? No, we're friends, good friends, the kind of friends who show up for each other. But you could be boyfriend and girlfriend someday, right? If you wanted to? Miles felt heat creep up his neck. Sophie, I'm just saying, you both like each other and you make each other happy. And that's what boyfriend and girlfriend means, right? Liking each other and being happy together? It's more complicated than that. Why? Because Grandma Lillian is your mom's mother. That creates complications. Only if you let it. Sophie returned to her pancakes. I think grown-ups make things complicated on purpose sometimes. Miles couldn't argue with that logic. How about this? He said carefully. Grandma Lillian and I are friends right now, good friends who care about each other. If that changes someday, we'll tell you. But right now, we're just helping each other be less lonely. Is that okay with you? It's very okay. I like when Grandma's happy, and I like when you're happy. So if you make each other happy, that's double good. You're pretty smart, you know that? Duh, I'm in 3rd grade. Miles smiled, feeling some of the tension ease. If kids at school say anything else that bothers you, tell me. We'll figure it out together. Okay, can I have more pancakes? One more. Then we need to get you to school. That afternoon, Miles texted Lillian. Talked to Sophie. She's fine. Actually thinks we're being dumb for worrying. The response came quickly. She said that? In so many words. She told me grown-ups make things complicated on purpose. She's not wrong. She rarely is. It's annoying. A pause, then, Miles? Thank you for handling that, for making sure she's okay. That's what parents do. Well, good parents anyway. You're a very good parent. I'm a parent who's trying. Some days that's the best I can manage. It's enough. You're enough. Miles stared at those words, feeling something warm settle in his chest. How long had it been since someone had said he was enough? Since Angela left, he'd spent every day feeling like he was falling short. Not enough time, not enough patience, not enough energy to be everything Sophie needed. But maybe enough wasn't about perfection. Maybe it was about showing up consistently, loving fiercely, and doing your best even when your best felt inadequate. You're enough too, he typed back. In case nobody's told you that lately. Nobody has. Thank you. The following week settled into a rhythm that felt sustainable. Miles worked, picked up Sophie, helped with homework and dinner and bedtime. Lillian's business grew steadily. More orders, more social media attention, more confidence in her voice when she talked about her work. They texted daily, had dinner together twice a week, and stopped worrying quite so much about what people thought. The gossip didn't disappear, but it faded into background noise. Some people still whispered. Some still made assumptions. But Miles had learned that living according to other people's narratives was exhausting and ultimately pointless. Better to live according to your own truth and let the gossip tire itself out. 3 weeks before Sophie's birthday, Lillian invited them both over to finalize the castle cake design. Sophie arrived with sketches and specific requests about turret placement, and Lillian took notes with the seriousness of someone accepting a commission for the Sistine Chapel. Miles watched them work together, their heads bent over drawings, and felt something shift inside him. Not sudden or dramatic, but quiet and certain. He cared about Lillian, not just as Sophie's grandmother or as a friend he was helping, but as someone who'd become essential to his life in ways he hadn't anticipated. He didn't know what to do with that realization, so he did nothing. Just sat there, drinking coffee Lillian had made the way he liked it without asking, and let the feeling exist without forcing it into a definition. After Sophie went to watch a movie in the living room, Lillian joined Miles at the kitchen table. "She's so excited about this cake," Lillian said, smiling. "I've never seen someone care so much about buttercream consistency. She gets fixated, always has. It's sweet, she knows what she wants." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the distant sound of animated characters singing floating in from the other room. "Can I ask you something?" Lillian said quietly. "Always. Do you ever wonder what people see when they look at us?" Miles considered the question. Probably a single dad and a lonely widow who found each other by accident. "Is that what we are?" "I don't know. What do you think we are?" Lillian traced the rim of her coffee cup. "I think we're two people who were drowning separately and figured out we could float better together." Miles felt that description settle somewhere deep. "Yeah, that sounds right." "The thing is," Lillian continued, her voice careful, "I'm not drowning anymore. I'm actually swimming, building something, looking forward to tomorrow instead of dreading it. And that's partly the business, but it's mostly you." Miles's heart picked up speed. "Lillian, let me finish." She looked at him directly now, her eyes clear and steady. "I know this is complicated. I know people talk. I know Angela would probably have a fit if she knew what I'm about to say. But I need to say it anyway, because I'm tired of being careful and quiet, and afraid of taking up space. Okay. I care about you, Miles. More than friends. More than I probably should. Lillian's voice shook slightly, but she didn't look away. And I don't know if you feel the same way, or if this is just me projecting because you've been kind to me and I'm lonely and confused, but I needed to tell you. Because honesty seems important and we've been honest about everything else. Miles sat very still, his mind racing through implications and complications and all the reasons this was a terrible idea. Lillian was Angela's mother. People would talk. Sophie would have questions. It would make everything more complicated. But when he looked at Lillian, really looked at her, he saw someone brave and kind and strong enough to rebuild herself from nothing. He saw someone who made him laugh and challenged him and showed up for his daughter with a love that asked for nothing in return. He saw someone who'd become essential, not because he needed saving or because she did, but because they'd chosen to see each other when the world wanted them both to disappear. I care about you too, he said quietly. Have for a while now. I just didn't know if I should say anything. Lillian's breath caught. Really? Really. You're one of the best people I know, Lillian. You're brave and kind and so much stronger than you give yourself credit for. And yeah, this is complicated. People will definitely talk. But I'm tired of making decisions based on what other people think. So what do we do? Miles reached across the table and took her hand. Her fingers were cool and trembling slightly, but her grip was steady. We take it slow, he said. We keep being honest with each other and with Sophie. We don't hide, but we don't make a production of it either. We just see where this goes. Together. Lillian's eyes filled with tears. I don't want to mess this up. Then we won't. Or if we do, we'll figure it out. Same way we figured out everything else. By showing up? Exactly. She laughed through tears, and Miles felt something in his chest unclench. This was terrifying and complicated and probably a disaster waiting to happen. But it was also real and honest and built on a foundation of actually seeing each other. That had to count for something. Sophie appeared in the doorway, oblivious to the moment she was interrupting. The movie's over. Can we make cookies now? Miles and Lillian looked at each other, sharing a smile that held promises and uncertainty and hope. Yeah, Lillian said, squeezing Miles's hand once before letting go. Let's make cookies. They spent the rest of the evening in Lillian's kitchen, Sophie between them chattering about castle architecture while they measured and mixed and laughed at nothing in particular. It was ordinary and perfect, the kind of moment that would have seemed impossible 3 weeks ago when Lillian was sitting alone in a coffee shop convinced she was invisible. Miles drove home with Sophie asleep in the back seat, the streetlights creating patterns across her peaceful face. His phone buzzed at a red light, a text from Lillian. Thank you for tonight, for being honest, for not running away. He typed back one-handed. Thank you for being brave enough to say something. I probably would have stayed quiet forever. We're both learning to take up space. Yeah, we are. Miles? I'm scared. Me too. But I think that's normal. We'll figure it out. Together? Together. Sophie's birthday arrived with clear skies and the kind of crisp November air that made everything feel sharp and possible. Lillian delivered the castle cake that morning, and Sophie's gasp when she saw it made every hour of careful construction worth it. The cake was magnificent. 3 tiers decorated to look like stone, fondant turrets with tiny flags, a sugar paste drawbridge that actually moved. It was professional quality, the kind of work that announced Lillian Brooks wasn't just baking cookies in her kitchen anymore. She was building something real. The party was small, 6 kids from school, pizza, and chaos that Miles navigated with the weary efficiency of someone who'd survived previous birthday parties. Lillian stayed to help, and Miles watched her interact with the kids with natural warmth that made his chest ache. When it came time to cut the cake, Sophie insisted Lillian do it. You made it. You should get to cut it first. Lillian's eyes filled with tears. She blinked away quickly. That's very sweet, but this is your birthday. I want you to, please. So Lillian cut the first slice while parents took photos and kids cheered and Miles stood back watching 2 people he loved celebrate each other. After the party wound down and the last parent picked up their sugar crash child, the 3 of them collapsed in Lillian's living room. Sophie sprawled on the floor with her new books, Miles and Lillian on the couch, with the careful distance of people still figuring out boundaries. "Best birthday ever," Sophie announced without looking up. "I'm glad," Lillian said softly. "Grandma?" "Yes, sweetheart?" "Are you and Dad dating?" Miles felt his whole body tense. Lillian's hand found his, their fingers tangling in the space between them. "We are," Lillian said carefully. "Is that okay with you?" Sophie finally looked up, studying them both with that unnerving 8-year-old directness. "Are you happy?" "Yes," they said together. "Then it's okay. Can I have another piece of cake?" "After dinner," Miles said automatically. "Ugh, fine." Just like that, the moment passed. Sophie returned to her books, and Miles and Lillian sat on the couch holding hands like teenagers, equal parts terrified and hopeful. Later, after Sophie had fallen asleep on the couch mid-page, Miles carried her to the truck while Lillian walked them out. The November night was cold and clear, stars visible despite the city lights. "So we're doing this," Lillian said quietly. "Really doing this. Looks like it. People are going to talk. Let them. Angela's going to have opinions. She usually does. Miles." He turned to face her fully, this woman who'd been humiliated in a coffee shop and somehow found the courage to rebuild herself into something stronger. "I'm not going to pretend I'm not scared. This is complicated and messy, and probably going to be harder than we think. But I'd rather do hard things with you than easy things with anyone else." Lillian's smile was tremulous but real. "That might be the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me. It's just the truth." "I know. That's what makes it romantic." Miles kissed her then, soft and careful, a promise more than a passion. When they pulled apart, Lillian was crying again. "Happy tears," she assured him. I can't believe this is real, that I get to feel this way again." "You deserve to feel this way. So do you." They stood there in the driveway, holding each other against the November cold, two people who'd learned that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was sit down when everyone else walked away. The gossip continued, of course. People talked about the age difference, the family connection, the scandal of it all. But Miles had learned something important in that coffee shop 3 weeks ago. Other people's narratives didn't have to become your truth. You could choose to live according to your own story, your own values, your own definition of what mattered. And what mattered was showing up, being seen, choosing kindness over fear and connection over safety. The rest was just noise. 6 months later, Lillian's cookie business had grown enough that she'd rented a small commercial kitchen space. Sophie spent every other weekend helping with simple tasks and eating as much batter as Lillian would allow. And Miles had learned that love didn't always look like fairy tales or Hollywood romance. Sometimes it looked like two broken people choosing to be whole together, building something beautiful from the wreckage of their separate lives. On a Tuesday afternoon in early spring, Miles walked into the same coffee shop where everything had started. He ordered his usual black coffee and looked for a quiet table, ready for 20 minutes of peace before picking up Sophie. A woman sat alone by the window, her face tight with poorly concealed distress while whispers circled her like vultures. Miles recognized that expression, that posture, that desperate attempt to become invisible. He looked at the empty chair across from her. He thought about walking away, about keeping his head down and minding his own business. Then he thought about Lillian and Sophie and the way one choice could ripple outward in ways you never anticipated. Miles walked over and sat down. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. The woman looked up, startled and wary. "Why would you want to do that?" Miles smiled. "Because everyone deserves someone to sit with them when the world decides they're not worth standing for." "You don't even know me." "I know what it feels like to be alone in a crowded room. That's enough." The woman's eyes filled with tears. Miles pushed a napkin across the table and waited, patient and present, while she decided whether to accept the kindness or run from it. She took the napkin, and Miles sat there steady and sure, proving once again that sometimes the smallest acts of showing up could change everything. Because dignity mattered, connection mattered, and somewhere in the wreckage of his divorce and Lillian's loneliness and a stranger's cruelty in a coffee shop, Miles had learned that the world didn't need more people who looked away. It needed more people brave enough to sit down.